Hello. Um, so this is another week of Bible Notes as we're talking through the Sermon on the Mount, which is three chapters of Matthew, which starts at Matthew 5. And Liz and myself are working our way through the Sermon on the Mount with you. I hope you can hear me. I don't know if it's being picked up, but there is so much building work happening at both Sainsbury's and the car park's being dug up next to me. So I hope that that's all fine. But today sees us finish the final beatitude. That doesn't mean we finish the Sermon on the Mount. There's still a lot more information to talk through. But today we're looking solely at Matthew 5, verses 10 to 12, which say, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." So as I say, this week sees us continue and finish this beatitude, the beatitude section of the Sermon on the Mount. And actually, this part of the Beatitudes, we know this is how Jesus lived out his life, because Jesus lived out his life to honour and glorify God. And what did he see in the face of that? He saw persecution, he saw opposition. And actually, in the midst of that, Jesus stayed close to God. Jesus gave thanks to God. Jesus worshipped him and didn't allow the persecution he experienced to stop him from drawing close to God. So when Jesus is speaking here, we know he lives out what he's saying. He's not asking us or telling us to do something, which he never did. He said this and then spent the next 3 years experiencing it and living it out. So what is persecution? It's simply when we experience opposition for something that we believe in. This can look different and does look different all over the world. For example, in places like China, persecution it can be experienced by being jailed for public worship of God in non-state regulated ways. Here in England, we don't have that. We get the ability to worship God publicly however we see fit. Does that mean we in England don't experience persecution because those in China experience it that way? Of course it doesn't. We can experience persecution in England, and some people do. It's just different, okay? Some people put persecution on a scale and say, well, actually, the being jailed for your beliefs is one end of the scale. And so because we don't experience it in such an extreme way, like they do in places in China, that our persecution doesn't count because it's nowhere near as bad as what they're going through. Now, I do think perspective helps us to get through difficult times, challenges, and opposition, but that shouldn't take away from the fact that we are still experiencing persecution. It's just different and not to the same level. In the West, persecution takes many different faces. One of these faces is cancel culture. We live in a place where we can be publicly cancelled for believing, saying, or doing something that a group of people don't agree with, and we can be publicly cancelled for that. Now, if that happens because of our Christian beliefs, lifestyle, and faith, then I would count that as persecution too. So, as you can see, persecution isn't one thing, it's any opposition we can face from the world because of our belief. It takes many different faces. These verses remind us that if we live out our faith, then we will be persecuted by the world. This shouldn't lead us to anger, but it should lead us to God, because it's a stated fact. We will. If we live out our beliefs, the world will pick up on it and call us out on it, and many people in the world won't like it. God will be pleased, though, that we're living in a way that stands out for him and that people are noticing in it. And when we do live God's way, yes, people will notice in the world, and we can know persecution. But in the face of that persecution, we can also know the blessing of God and the closeness of God. And actually, the closeness of God is a blessing in itself. So Jesus here reminds us that our persecution should lead us to worship, should lead us to give thanks to God. Why? Because in the midst of opposition from the world, God stands with us. God stands by us, and God is for us, and he never leaves us. How much thanks do you give when you're faced with opposition? Personally, I can say not enough. The first thing, actually, when I'm experiencing opposition for my faith, one of the first things I ask God to do is to take away the persecution, to take away the opposition. I don't naturally go to thanks when I'm experiencing persecution and say, God, stop it. Stop them from doing it. Take it away, God. Whereas Jesus here is reminding us that we go into experience it, and that the heroes of our faith in the Bible, they all experienced this opposition and persecution too. Again, it probably looked differently than how we would experience it. But if we're all experiencing persecution because of our belief, we're in good company. We're in company of some of the heroes of our faith. And we need to give thanks to God for his presence with us amidst all of this. Barry mentioned something last week whilst he was speaking on Sunday, that we shouldn't look to purposely offend people. That's not what living a holy life is about. It's not seeking to offend. It's about, our lives are supposed to be about being a light for Christ, not being the person who shines a torch in someone's eyes on purpose. And I'll speak more about that next week. But we shouldn't be a people looking for persecution. We should be a people aware that when we live out how God calls us to live out our lives, we will stand out. We will look different to the world. That people will notice. And some people, not all people, but some people won't like it. And some people will speak up about that. Remember, we're called to be a holy people. And to be holy means to be set apart, different, standing out from the world. When we do this properly, people will notice. And yes, some will persecute us for it. But it's not about making a song and dance about it. It's not about rubbing it in people's faces either. This is about simply living out our faith as normally and every day as we can, as consistently as we can. But knowing that when we do, we will face opposition. But knowing how we respond is up to us. How you respond to being persecuted is up to you. No one will make us react badly to persecution. One of the fruits of the Spirit that Barry talked about is self-control. That means being with God means we have the ability to control how we react in the face of things that upset us. That means in the face of persecution and opposition, we can choose to lash out, we can choose to let it destroy our lives and bring us down, or we can choose Jesus and we can choose to worship him in the face of it. We can choose to trust him in the face of it. We can still choose the Jesus way. The challenge is, will we? We can't change the fact that persecution might come because it's a product of holy living. But we can change our response to persecution and make sure that it's one of worship. That's the Jesus way. That's what the Beatitudes are all about. What's the Jesus way of living? What is the Jesus way? Worship in the face of persecution. Will we show it? It's always a choice.